터득시 다 당연히 그 뒤에 간지 아니면 subject 담는 거 봐. 도대 공대는 시도다 노드면서 시험에 대해서 또 이유. 다 도대 공대는 시도 걸어 도대네 지가 송도 거 받아 티팅 지가 저 subject이나 다 당연히 된다. 다 신년 도대는 지가 송도 그루스야 거 다 신년 같아요.
So Gisela likes to repeat where we are, remind you where we are. We're about to enter the two great branches, one going off into the mind-only school, one going off into the Madhyamika school belief about how to interpret things. And in the mind-only school, we're going to have the Lord Buddha's own commentary on what he meant in the sutras, and then we're going to have the actual sutra sections, and they're going to be followed by Jetsunkapa's commentary on those sections. And then after that, we reach the sutra of unending, never-ending wisdom, and then from there we're going to learn the Madhyamika viewpoint. So just to remind you, we're starting off with Dode Gongdo, which is the Buddha's own commentary on what he meant, and then the commentary on that by Jetsunkapa.
상제 좀된 되지 도가시를 된대 송샤 가시를 된대 송샤 다 대사지 송바도 상제 좀된 지그라 했어. 이제 상제 좀된데 코라랑 나올라 간도 말했어. 이나양 도그 식신나 시샤는 도그 찍고를 찍을 인송시 찍는 뭐 이거 이때 가리나 삼베다 두잔남나 토바요 인터넷 토바디야 셀리에 된다 토바디 매버서에 된다 상제 좀된 간디 쉬어요. 근데 쉬어고 다 장직심도 단단히 양다 파세지. 장직심이 공기 당하나도 마소나 잡잡지니야. 근데들이 송제 대들이 인송제 내가 많이 송제 이 가리나 지금 약간도 쉬어요. 다 쉬사고 과르서는 알아도 저는 콜로로 저는 상심이 총고르지가 먹고 숨어야지 제난 양 그나 심바 숨숨자를 콜로 당보치 니와치 숨마세요. 타고 당보 간디 쉬사고 콜로 당보 중에 니반이를 간디 쉬고 알았어. 콜로 당보 나는 들이 숨샤 인수 숨샤 콜로 니반은 많이 숨이 고 식신 거라샤 간디 용구도 제가 때 간디나 저는 약간도 쉬고 제가 그대로 가고 들어서 사제 당보 되려요.
The very first of the three categories that we're going to discuss now is called a question regarding apparent inconsistencies in the sutras. And generally speaking, it's impossible for an enlightened being to be inconsistent, to say one thing in one sutra and to say another thing later that doesn't match each other. But if you take the sutras literally, if you look at the wording itself, it appears that the Lord Buddha has contradicted himself in different sutras. Like he said one thing at one place, later on he said something different. And if you take them literally, then the Buddha seems to be contradicting himself. So someone is going to ask the Buddha a question concerning why did you do that? Are you being contradictory or what is it? And he's going to ask a question about the three turnings of the wheel. The Buddha turned the wheel of the Dharma 3 times in his career, in his teaching career. The first, second, we'll get into it later what the meanings are, but there were 3 periods of his teaching, 3 great turnings of the wheel. And someone's going to ask the Buddha a question about why does the first turning of the wheel, what you said during the first turning of the wheel, seems to contradict what you said during the second turning of the wheel, or rather the reverse, right? What you said the second time didn't match what you said the first time. You seem to contradict yourself. We know you can't contradict yourself, so what did you mean when you said that? And there's a section in the book called The Buddha Making a Commentary on His Own Sutra, right? Where it's called the chapter that was asked by the bodhisattva named Dundam Yandak Pak. So this is a certain bodhisattva on our behalf, he says, Geshe-la says, representing all of us students, going to happen throughout history. He asked the Buddha, why did you appear to contradict yourself when you taught when you turned the wheel on these different occasions? And that will be the first section, which is called a question regarding apparent inconsistencies in the Buddha's own presentation. We're at the bottom of page 4, third line from the bottom. The second section will be, by the way, Geshe-la points out that, of course, we'll go into more detail later. I'm just giving you a rough out of where we're going. the second section, in the second section that is to come, the Buddha will give his response, and he'll say, well, you know, when I taught it that way, I had this in mind because there were those students there. And when I taught it later, I had this in mind, and I taught it a little bit differently because those students were there. And the Buddha will explain the apparent inconsistencies in his own presentation.
네 디베트를 삼로탄 숭바인 시지를 삼로탄 사지와라 토나 산심네데 저는 도이스는 공시 삼로탄에서 공부시 사지와라 오 콜라 사체니 세니 숨걸 민단도 원이 숨세야지 원이 숨세지라 원내니 민들 숨바인 진내 견도서 원이 숨세를 가리나 하고메가 원이 숨버디 원이 당보디래 원이 이거디 원이 숨버디 디래 그 마산심네데 세시지 그래서 sabjagolo 원이 숨고
the third section is Jetsun Kappa explaining to you what the Buddha meant when he was referring to the three essences, the three essential natures. These are called the three characteristics or the three natures, which are very special to the mind-only school. So the Buddha in his response is going to say, well, you know, when I was teaching this group, who turns out to be the mind-only school, right? I had to use the idea of the three essential natures. And later on, Jetsun Kappa has to explain what are these three essential natures that he's referring to. What are these three special characteristics that he's referring to when the Buddha gives his response and says, yeah, when I taught this group, knowing that their minds were in such and such a condition, I had to refer to a thing called the three essential natures. And I was using that as a vehicle when I gave my presentation to a certain group. So Jetsun Kappa is going to go into more on what are those three essential characteristics. And this is really the guts of the mind-only school.
딱딱한 캔렘 표정이지. 딱 콜라 렌고 좀 콜라 숨바디 샤브스. 야 렌마 렌케죠. 콜라 숨바디 샤브스. 자, 근데 마음 먹고 딱딱한 땅에 들어서 som디. 들어서도 코 딱딱 캔렌 총이 샤브스. 콜라 숨바고 그는 예비 딱딱 캔렌. 콜라 당분이 못해. 도파요아 인자가 딱딱한 캔렘 표정이 샤브. 당도세요. 자고 주대에 손다만 손 캡상고 그런 거 스페르잖아.
Generally speaking, when you have an exchange, financial exchange, somebody's buying, somebody's selling, and you have this exchange going on, you know, like one guy is making an offer, the other guy's accepting it, and then he'll make an offer and he's accepting it, and then finally after you have this exchange, there's a profit that comes out of it, like some kind of result of the transaction. So he says, it's similar here that after this exchange of questions and answers, people are asking the Buddha, what do you mean when you seem to contradict yourself? And then the Buddha answers back. And out of this exchange is produced a clear picture of what the Buddha really meant all along. So that's like our profit out of all this financial transactions. So you can look upon the first and second turnings of the wheel as, since they are somewhat, they have to be interpreted. They are not meant literally. They were the Buddha saying things that maybe he didn't exactly mean literally. By the time you get to the third turning of the wheel, he's finished explaining the first two, so the third turning of the wheel is the one that's the real one, where he really says what he literally meant, and then the first two are sort of these exchanges. So the third turning of the wheel, or what's called here is druptun, which is like the result of the transaction, or what you get out of the exchange. The thing that is arrived at after the exchange is going to be the third turning of the wheel, and in there you find out, finally, due to the questions and answers, you find out the conclusion at the end through the exchange. So the fourth category will be the conclusion resulting from the exchange. Okay. I'm just giving you a general picture of each of the categories that we're going to be going through. You won't really appreciate the whole category until we get there and we get the whole explanation. But I just want you to be able to see the overall picture and then get in your mind some kind of a seed for understanding the whole thing when you get to it later.
Sigine di parte la da legge sono quello che si sta dando la tanga.
Nasa.
Di c'era un
Nasa, nasa.
E ne sciugure c'era un sciugure.
Nasa, nasa, nasa.
Ne di ciuccia.
Nasa che. Nasa. Nasa.
Che c'è di zata da dire sta sigin carto di sciugure shibati in tama tena. Sigin tama tena.
Last line, page 4.
Lo ha di ya kandi sciugure. 당번이 공대래 순대리 남랑도 뭐 풍번남이랑 생기 가서 지기 생기 방어도 시바 가서 풍번은 시도신 계제남 된대중 세시다 감 주다 저기로 가서 대신도 전에 대만남이랑 생기 용수 시에바다 방어도 온도 지바다 공바다 감남이랑 생기 감나서 봐도 두마다 안에 방어도 용수 시에바다 장수 소진이 생기도 믿음보다 믿음보다 마지바다 제바는 미지보다 나지 패신 영원히 이제 가자라 이것도나 그런 거 지기
By the way, in the monastery, the great monks memorize this whole book. It's considered so important that they memorize the whole thing. So it's in his mind, you know. So he says, this whole thing is the question that's posed to the Buddha. Okay, that whole chunk, he said, Dogdo means chunk, that whole chunk there is a question posed to the Buddha. And that is the chunk that's proposed to the Buddha. Okay. He also advised me that I could go over the wording with you later, but he wants you to get the meaning. So he says, you can do wording later with them. But I'm going to say, this chunk after that chunk means this, you know, and that's what he's going to do it. He says, you know, you can't blame me for doing a horse race because you guys don't have much time.
산지 좀 된데 콜로 당부 송으로 총으로 당부 송으로 총으로 당부 거나라 깨져 din에 시에샤 따때 가르에서 깨져 din에 시에샤 사랑이 din에 송샤 세냐 밀리아 쉬어 그랬다 콜로 당부는 근데 이 파트
So up to here is the Bodhisattva asking Lord Buddha. Now in that, when you turn the wheel the first time, when you taught the Dharma the first time, his first great period of teaching, he said, didn't you say that? And what exactly did you mean when you say that? Did you say that or didn't you say that? Okay, he's posing a question.
타 송는데서 산지 좀 되지 콜로 담배 나는 쟤는 송사 시지와 알아 송사 시대라 풍봉아이 콜로 쟤는 풍봉 다 알아서 무슨 디자인도 속바에서 풍봉알 때 풍봉아이 디자인 콜로 프랑프랑 양 직송샤 풍봉하지라 디슈고대로 풍봉하지 되니 풍봉남지 디신 계지 중이 계지 중이 직시 디슈고라 땡데 중이 알아 땡데 중이라 거 직시 알아 디슈고라 세시 알아 세시고 권한 거 직송 내가 풍봉하는 이랑 기지다 빈지도 세안 다 디슈고라 덴바시 알아 덴바시 직송 디슈고라 된 감접계지가 감지하러 감접계지 콜로 직송을 디슈고대로 아니 장조 디자인 디서라 직송을 제가 다 때는
So if you summarize the first turning of the wheel, Lord Buddha has covered 7 different discrete subjects during the first turning of the wheel. First one being the 5 heaps or the 5 skandhas, the 5 parts to a person. Hope I can remember these. Second one being the 12 ayadanas, which is basically your sense organs and your 6 consciousnesses. And their objects. Third one being somebody Pumbo Keche. The 12 links of dependent origination is the third one. Fourth subject was the 18 categories. Number 4 was the 4 different kinds of sustenance. Okay. Number 5 was the 4 Arya truths. Number 6 is what we call the 18 categories of existence. 18 categories. And then number 6 is the 37 components of enlightenment. Okay, so that's the subject of the first turning of the wheel is summarized in those 7 sections.
랑기 생이 추가 있니? 아, 대한발 추가 있니? 작은 걸 쏜다. 맞아. 하고 쇼지를 샤워했다. 네. 녹화를 사이 다 쇼지를 대박 직송을 다리나. 쇼지를 대샤워했어. 지난 뒤는 현다요. 네. 아마 될 때. 디dum인데 대박 추바. 랑기 생이 추가 있으면 하고 쇼지.
Now you could go into dividing up those there's divisions of 3 to some of those 7. There's divisions of 4 of those 7s, divisions of 5, divisions of 8. You could go into a long spiel on just those 7 divisions. I mean, you could discuss the content of those 7 divisions, but that's not the point here. The point is that at the end of all ends, the Buddha, during the first turning of the wheel, referred to all the divisions of all those 7s and said, they exist by definition. They exist in truth. They have their own independent existence. And the Buddha said that during the first turning of the wheel. That's the question we have to look at. That's the part of the first turning of the wheel that we're really concerned with here. We're not going to go into all of those components and all of those categories and everything. The question here is, did the Buddha say those things exist by definition, from their own side, truly, in truth? Did he say that, and what did he mean? Because no matter what he taught during the first turning of the wheel, all of those 7 categories and all the details of those 7 categories, he said one thing about all of them. He said they all exist by definition. They all exist from their own side. They all exist in truth.
What is it? How is it that the Pungonga change, Pungonga Jari Mondusa? Awesome. Kejoma and Kejoton, one of the things that I don't know. Tauragina, Shungabati, Shungabatella. Yes, sir. And to say, from the number of Kamaru, Shungabi, you don't put him down there. The Pumbonamji, Rangi, Teni, and Katal, Sidwa, in Pumbonamji, Rangi, Teni, and Katal, Sidwa, did it. The Rangi Teni was the Batu was from Shafi.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, page 5, first line. Is the Buddha starting out, question being posed to the Buddha about, look, you talked about the 5 parts of every being, of beings, and then you went on to say that they existed by definition, meaning this means from their own side, independently. So you seem to have said that when you referred to the 5 heaps, and this is part of the question here. That's again.
Yes, Nipa Tasumbacolari, Kiri Shula, Chikdo, Kiji, Chikdo, yes, Tatino, Pawatons, and Pawas, the Pungu, the Nicha, Pumba della Carasena, Marazu Pumbuta Tapena, something you won't see, you turn out to do not get greasy, the Pungu, Panzare, Chikda, Punga Chikda. 수수 냠수 랑자이 답변에 야게람 토토벌리 기분이 또 냠수 랑자이 제는 빵와다 양수 시에봐 시 이제 인송 다 양수 시에봐 자주시 돼 다 찍라야 되게 돼 말도 동아 시에봐 자 군중 빵와차 수수하러 빵세에 풍부되라 말아도 육군중 대비 뒤위 다 직지하래 직지 빵자리 동아 대비 뒤샤가 풍부직지 때문에 또 동아 이먹고 된대 시행고를 이렇게 좀
Nasa. Dambodi Rangiteni Duba Dagana. Nasa. The Kecha Dhammatichay. Nasa. So when the Buddha taught about the 5 parts of a person, he did so by describing 5 characteristics of the 5 parts of a person. Okay? So those 5 parts of a normal person have 5 characteristics. The first characteristic being that he said they exist by definition. They have some kind of true existence, he said in the first turning of the wheel. Secondly, he said they have a quality of having begun, of having started, of having been created. Okay. Thirdly, he said they have a quality of being destroyed, of coming to an end. Thirdly, he said they have a quality of being abandoned. And here, Geshe-la started out by saying abandoned can have different meanings. In general, sooner or later you're going to have to abandon them. The 5 heaps, these 5 heaps that we have, the mortal ones, that are bound to suffer, bound to die, you will have to give them up, you'll have to abandon them in that sense. And as you get higher in the paths, and as they start to transform, then you get parts of them that you don't have to abandon anymore. That's one way of explaining quality number, we're on 4, right? But the other way of explaining quality number 4, when you say abandon or to give up, it could be referring to the 5 heaps as they regard to the second of the 4 noble truths, which is the source of suffering. So he says, if you look at the 5 parts of a person from the viewpoint of the second Arya truth, right? Then you see that they are the source of suffering. You see how the source of suffering relates to the 5 heaps, and it's very famous in the sutras where the Buddha says you have to eliminate Arya truth number 2. you have to get rid of it. You see, the source of suffering is something that should be gotten rid of. And then what he said about the fourth noble truth, fourth Arya truth, is that, the first Arya truth is that this is something you must realize is going on. What's number one? Suffering. So he said, you have to realize what's going on. So your relationship to the first Arya truth should be to realize it. Your relationship to the second Arya truth should be to eliminate it. So with regard to the 5 skandhas, or the 5 parts to a person, the first characteristic that the Buddha said was they exist from their own side, they have their own true existence. Then he said they start. Then he said they stop. Then he said with regard to the source of suffering quality that they have, you have to get rid of it. With regard to the truth of suffering quality that they have, which is that they are suffering, you have to realize what's going on. You have to understand that they are suffering. Okay? So those are the 5 characteristics that the Buddha used to describe the 5 heaps. But the first of those is that they exist by definition. They do exist from their own side. And now Yandapak is asking Lord Buddha, hey, and you said the same things when you taught the second big subject, which was those 12 ayadanas, the 12 we call them the doors of existence or something like that, meaning things occur through the presence of your sense powers. Okay, the gates of existence or something. You can call them the 12 gates. When you got to the 12 gates, which is just another way of dividing up people, instead of 5 heaps you can say 12 gates. When you got to the 12 gates, you went through the same 5 characteristics with them. Okay, and then when you got on to the 12 links of dependent origination, you went through the 5 parts with them too. 5 parts meaning they do exist from their own side, they began, they stop, they have their own source of suffering, they have their own suffering, which you should realize. Okay, and when you discovered the 4 kinds of sustenance, you also discussed them in those 5 characteristics. So you applied those 5 characteristics to your discussion of each one of those different subjects: the 5 heaps, the 12 doors of sense, the 12 parts of dependent origination, and then the 4 kinds of sustenance. But whatever you taught in the first turning of the wheel, you said that it had those 5 characteristics. And the first characteristic was that it existed on its own, of its own accord, by definition. So for all 4 of those different categories, you said all 5 are complete in each one of those 4. When you got to the 4 Arya truths, which was his 5th subject, right, in the first turning of the wheel, you discussed it in terms of 2 divisions rather than 5. And when you got to the 4 Arya truths, the one thing you definitely said about them was that they do have their own true existence. They do exist from their own side. They do have a definitive existence. They exist by definition. We said that each of the 4 noble truths, 4 Arya truths, had 2 characteristics each. And here's how it comes out to 2 each. The first one is the truth of suffering. And your relationship to that has to be that you have to realize that that's going on. So in the sutra it says, the truth of suffering is something to be realized or something that you have to understand is really happening, otherwise you can't get anywhere. You have to realize that the truth of suffering is going on. That's your relationship to this first Arya truth. Your relationship to the second Arya truth, which comes naturally because you think to yourself, why am I suffering, is the second Arya truth being the source of suffering, and your relationship to that source has to be, I want to get rid of it, I want to eliminate it, okay? Then you should come up in your mind, is it possible to stop it entirely? Can I stop suffering entirely? Yes, and that's truth number 3, and your relationship to truth number 3 should be to bring it about, the end of suffering. And your relationship to truth number 4, which comes naturally, oh, how do I bring it about, which is the path, is to practice the path, to carry out the path. So there are 4 Arya truths. You have a different relationship to each one, and that each of those separate relationships is the first characteristic of each truth. So, for example, for the noble truth of suffering, the first characteristic is you have to know what's going on. Noble truth of the source of suffering, the first characteristic is you have to understand that it's happening. I'm sorry, get rid of it. Okay, the relationship to the third noble truth, and also its first characteristic is that you want to achieve it, and your relationship to the fourth noble truth, which is its first characteristic, is that you want to practice it. That's the first characteristics of each one of the 4 Arya truths. What's the second characteristic, which is actually the first one stated, is that they all exist by definition. They all exist truly. So the Buddha said those 2 things about each one. So each one has its own unique characteristic, and then all 4 have their common characteristic, which is that the Buddha said that exists by definition, exists from its own side.
Tata, 이제는 마서 속바다 마서는 게래 주바디샤, 주바디 감차.
나서.
다 감고라 체주 시전이서.
나서.
감세야 고라 감나서 바세, 감나서 바세 지다 감투마 시체. 감나서 바세 문제 시도도 감투체. 감투마세 감 투마스야 고라 감쪽게서 말아서 감쪽시는 문제 지다지. 감쪽게서 문제 지다. 군인이 뭐데 감자네 감나서 바다 감투마. 아니 한 감텔라야 말아주 감축당 감쪽게고스에 그들라야 말아주야 동안 대바다 군중대 미직지야 디저를 때는 동안 당연한 신체 감 동안 대비 뒤를 감카이바티 동아지랑 신부신 그래 군중대비 뒤를 감카이바티 코방자이 말이 신고래 신 감라 엔케주 시절
나서 후 okay 18 dhatus, which is the 18 categories of existence. There's 4 characteristics that Lord Buddha taught with regard to the 18 categories, okay? But here he doesn't say 18 categories, he just says categories, okay? So the first time he says categories, he says kamnatsopa, which means the 6 categories, not the 18, okay? So when he says categories the first time, or the first character of the categories, is the 6 categories. These are Sachu Melung Namshe Namka. They were talking about the 4 elements, earth, water, fire, wind, consciousness, and space. And that's one of the 6, those are called the 6 dhatus, or the 6 kams, or the 6 categories. So that's the first characteristic of the categories, is when he discusses them in terms of 6. When he discusses the categories again, he discusses them in terms of 18. Which is the 6 objects of the senses, the 6 senses, and the 6 consciousness of the senses. So then you get 18. Then he went on to say, you have to get rid of something, don't you? And there he's referring to the 18 categories with reference to their being the source of suffering. Okay? Because that's when you're talking about the 18 parts of existence, and you're identifying certain pieces of those parts as being something you have to get rid of, you're talking about the component of the noble truth of the source of suffering which they have. Okay? Then when you get on to Yonsu Shepa, it means you have to realize, meaning you have to just get it, that there are parts among these 18 categories of all existence that you have to realize what? Realize that they are suffering. So now he's applying that to the first noble truth. So Lord Buddha, in the first turn of the wheel, teaches the categories of existence in 4 different ways. He says you can divide them into 6, you can divide them into 18, you can look at them in terms of what you have to eliminate, which is the source of suffering, and you can look at them in terms of the source of suffering itself, which is something you have to just realize is going on. And that's how you, Lord Buddha, taught the categories of existence. He's still posing his question. Okay. Correction, okay? Kam na tsopa, the first of the four, is the 18, and Kam duma, the second of the four, is the 6th. I said 6 first and 18 second, which is what he said the first. And then he said, well, now we have to, it's really na tsopa means 18, which is the first. So first he taught the categories as 18, then he taught the categories as 6, then he discussed the categories in terms of the source of suffering that you have to eliminate with them, and then he taught the categories in terms of the suffering which you just have to realize is going on. Okay? And that's his presentation. That's Lord Buddha's way of presenting the categories. He wants to go over the 18 categories with you and make sure you understand. This is Abhidharma first chapter. Okay. I want to explain the 18 to you. Well, it's 6 times 3 is 18. 6 times 3 is 18. Maybe you want to know what the 6 are. There are 6 receptors, 6 sensors that a human being has. So the first one is the eyes, like that see things, the ears that pick up things, audible things, the nose that smells the smellable things, the tongue that tastes tasteable things, the body which senses tangible things, and then your mind, let's see, oh, you guys think it's up here, like this, that understands things. And so these are basically the 6 sensors, or the 6 receptors that the being has. So there are 6 different sensors, meaning understanders, he says, that things are going on. And they are sitting on 6 different chairs. They need a chair to sit on, don't they? I mean, they need to sit and do their work. So 6 people who know what's going on have to have 6 seats to sit on. So you can think of 6 chairs on which the 6 sensor beings are sitting, and those 6 chairs are the sense organs. And he says, for example, with the eye, there's the eyeball, but don't think that's the sense organ. That's not the sense organ itself. The sense organ itself is the cells at the back of the eyes that are receptors and which are sensitive to forms and colors. And I guess you're a scientist, I figured it out by now, he says. But it's not the eyeball per se, it's the sensitive cells included at the back of the eye, which is the chair on which the seeing sensor sits. And then the ear has its similar chair, the nose has a chair like that, the tongue has a chair like that, the body, and then the mind. Then there are 6 objects which are to be sensed. So he talked about sensors or receptors, and now he's talking about the receptivities, things to be received and the things to be sensed. And that also has 6 divisions. So in the case of the eye, you are sensing shapes and colors. In the case of the ear, you're hearing wow, 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 noises. In the sense of the nose, you're sensing sounds. And then in the sense of the nose, you're smelling certain objects, you're tasting certain objects, you're feeling certain objects. And then with regard to the mind, you are perceiving certain objects which are not included into the other five. So the object of the mind is not tastes or colors or sounds like that. It is what we call dharma. And that's, in this case, dharma means all those objects which are not covered by the other five. And that or that category is called dharma dhatu, and that's the real meaning of dharma dhatu. Dharma dhatu is the category of things which the mind sensor is sensing when he sits on his chair of the mind sense organ, and he's looking out and he's thinking about things that cannot be described by the senses, like the concept of impermanence or the concept of something growing. Concepts or facts or truths are objects of the mental sense, and that way you get 18. 6 sensors sitting on 6 chairs of the sense organs, focusing on 6 sensations that they are looking at. That's the 18 categories. So we finished 6 of the 7 divisions of the first novel, of the first turning of the wheel.
The
7th of the subjects of the first turning of the wheel is called the 37 qualities of enlightenment. Those can be divided into 7 groups, and when you add them all up, they add up to 37. The so doing doesn't look at you gate.
So doing the Janari, the Janari, the Jana Subdin Rawa. Kunchipa, Chanjo, the then Dincha, the then Jana Topani, Toparo Chignis, Takuina, Tina Chignis, Subdin.
There are again, I believe he says among 37 qualities of enlightenment, in the 37 qualities there are 7 different groups. Ani sopa do ani dila kechi geyo. So just so doing the kechi geyo.
So doing the Dungu Karcha, Dungu Karcha,
Naso,
Nachi, Yanama, she, the Tampani, then the Yanda Makasa, Yanda Pong, she, to do the Kama, she, Ango Mare, Toga, Chanju Yala, Malami Yala. The Zensiana from Fokara,
37 enlightenment qualities divided into 7 groups, and then each of them having their own. It divides out to 37, but he's saying they're going to have 8 characteristics. Okay, so whether you treat them as 37 individual members, or whether you treat them in regards of 7 groups, they have 8 characteristics. And then he went through the 7 groups. The 4 recollections. Four recollections. The 4 awarenesses, really. That isn't what you know. Soba mean that the 4 perfect abandonments. How's that? Okay. The 4 legs, the 4 miraculous legs. Okay, they just have names like this. The 5 powers. The 5 powers in the 37 don't refer to the 5 powers in the 18. Okay, they're not referring to the sense powers. They're talking about powers of a Buddha. And then the 5 forces of a Buddha. And that adds up to 37, hopefully. Oh, sorry, we missed the 8 components of the Arya path. That should add up to 37. I think it's 4, 4, 4, 5, 5, and 8. So it's 4. 3 times 4 is 12. 2 times 5 is 10. That's 22. Right? And then the Palamyan like gay. It's 30. And then Dun Chileshan. So Palamyan like gay like Dun. Oh, I'm sorry, I blew one. And the 7 limbs of enlightenment. Okay, so then you get 37, which is somewhere, it's probably before the 8 parts of the Arya path. And it's not the main subject here. he says.
Okay.
Whether you treat these 37 individually or whether you treat them in groups that total 7 groups. Each of the 37 as individually or the 37 in the 7 groups has 8 characteristics, but the one that covers all of them is the same as the first one in all the others, which is they exist from their own side, they exist by definition, they exist in truth.
Okay.
Okay, now you get the 7 remaining ones of the 8 qualities that are shared by the 37 qualities, which is the 7th category, right? Okay, so here they go. The first quality of the 8 was that they existed from their own side or by definition, right? The second one is called mitumba. Mitumba means not getting along with one another, fighting with each other. And what it refers to is the fact that although the 37 qualities are all wonderful, each one of them has its own enemy, right? So for example, if you take love, its enemy might be hatred. So the quality of discordance applies to all 37, meaning they don't concord with their opposites. They don't get along with their opposites. There's a hassle, there's a fight out, punch out going on between, and he says it that way. He likes to say things like this. He says, there's a punch out going on between love and anger. So there's an idea that there's a discordance going on with all of the 37. Each one of the 37 has a quality of discordance where it's fighting against the quality which is negative. And that's the discordance is the second quality of all 37. So if you should name number 2 the enemy. Okay, mitumba means the opposite. Literally in Tibetan it means the opposite. So quality number 1 again exists in truth or by definition. Quality number 2 is it has its enemy. And quality number 3 is called counteragent or antidote or fix. And that refers to each of the 37 acts as its antidote or its fix for one of those for its corresponding negativity, which is number 2, right? Okay. Each one of the 37 also has a quality of creating what was not created before, or causing what was not caused before, or giving you something that you didn't have before. So it's called makeba keba, means to bring about something that wasn't brought about yet. Meaning that each time you get one of these 37 qualities, it enables you to engender in yourself spiritual qualities that you haven't yet engendered. So the third quality a fourth one, right? Shared by all 37 is that it engenders that which has not yet been engendered. Okay. Now we're on to the 6th quality? 5th quality. 5th quality of all 37 is Kyepa Nepa, means once you have engendered a good spiritual quality, they empower you to maintain it. And he says most of us, we get some beginning of a spiritual good quality, and it's almost as if a mugger mugs us and takes it away from us. They always tend to degenerate, you know. But once you get into these 37 qualities of enlightenment, then you have, each one of them has the power to help you maintain the good spiritual quality which you have previously engendered. So that which is not engendered got engendered, and that which was engendered is being maintained. Okay.
내가 약보고 유사프라는 딱딱 람 약보로 좀 약보치사 다 연대 약보치사 프로 딱딱 연대 약보거나 강사님들 카가 짐부도 먹고 그 나는 여기인지 숨주소빈 뒤중나 숨주소빈은 강 중나 아니야 뒤중나 그 란긴데니 강사고 독사로 땅 약사프라는 딱딱 약사다 카가 짐부도 가지라 지기 여자 미치 바시 내가 다니 이마도 미치 바사 미치 바스나네 내가 다니 바스도 미치 바스 카가 미치 바스
the next one is called Mikyopa, which is an ancient term. He says it's an anachronism for the idea of uncuttable or inseparable. And what it means is that once you have a good spiritual quality, once you've been able to maintain the good spiritual quality, then no matter which one of the 37 good qualities it is, once you get into it, this is a characteristic of all 37 that allows you to keep yourself from being separated from this good quality and going off to some bad quality. So it's like some kind of inseparability that doesn't allow you to be cut off from it and wander off to its negative, to the negative side. So it's an ancient word. We're going to get into these words in more detail later, but and it comes later. The words, you won't find them right here at this section. He says this quality is that you will not be separated, or you'll not be cut off from this good quality that you've been able to maintain. You will constantly be connected to that good quality. Are we on to what, number 7? Is a quality called perpetuation, meaning it's self-perpetuating and self-improving. So once you get any one of these 37 qualities, each one of those 37 qualities has its own quality of improving itself constantly. This tape stopped maybe? I'm not sure. That's quality number 7. That once you get into any one of the 37 qualities, it is self-perpetuating, self-improving. It has a self-improving quality to it. It keeps going better and better. Let it again. Whereas number 7 had this idea of getting higher and higher, getting better and better, number 8 is like it gets broader and broader, or wider and wider. So once you have one of those 37 qualities, it tends to be self-widening, self-increasing on a horizontal sort of feeling, and the other one is this number 7 was sort of a getting higher and higher. So this is like ever fattening, ever widening, you know, and it just keeps getting wider and wider, okay, like that, more vast, okay. Those are the 8 qualities shared by the 37 components of enlightenment.
그 콜로 통도 나라 니디 취 가져야 예자 간걸로 한게 생이 두 가지 까사샤 그다음 어디 간디슈
Now comes the whole point of the question. The Bodhisattva was asking the question. The Buddha says, okay, you taught in the first turning of the wheel these 7 categories of teachings, and then you went on to this long story about how they have all these separate characteristics after characteristic, division after division. You talked about it over and over again, but there's one thing that all of them had in common. There's one thing you kept saying about all of them, and that was that they existed by definition. They existed from their own side. They had some kind of true existence. You repeated that quality in every single one of these 7 groups. You repeated it for every single component of these 7 groups. Now, what I want to ask you, Lord Buddha, about is that one. You know, when you got to that, what were you talking about when you said, oh, they exist by definition or from their own side? So if you take the whole question that the Bodhisattva was asking, separate out all those other details that we talked about, let's isolate this idea of them existing from their own side or by definition. Now let's talk about that. Let's focus on that quality. And all of this is stuff that you, Lord Buddha, said in the first turning of the wheel. And in the first turning of the wheel, if we isolate out the one quality that you seem to be pressing on, it was that things had some kind of natural existence or existence from their own side. Now we're getting to a second section. If we read out from page 5, 6th line from the bottom, there's a sentence that begins with Chomden De. And he says, Buddha, then you got into the second turning of the wheel, which we sometimes call the in-between turning of the wheel. Sometimes it's given that name. So when you got to the in-between turning of the wheel, meaning the second turning of the wheel, then, Lord Buddha, you said something totally different. Then when you got to the middle turning of the wheel, which always means the second one, right? When you got to the middle turning of the wheel, right after you'd finished the first turning of the wheel, where you mentioned these 7 groups and all these things, everything from a person's physical form, which is the first of the 5 parts or skandhas, all the way up to the 37 qualities of enlightenment, all from between there, you said one thing. They all do have their own true existence. They all do have their independent existence. And then, when you got to the second turning of the wheel, you reversed yourself and you said, there is nothing in the universe that has any natural existence. There's nothing in the universe that exists from its own side. There's nothing in the universe that has any true kind of existence. Then that's what you said during the second turning of the wheel. And the wording you used during the second turning of the wheel was that things don't start of their own accord. That was the wording you used. Meaning they don't exist by definition, they don't exist from their own side, they don't exist in truth. The wording he used was things don't start of their own accord. Then you said they don't start. You said nothing starts. No object in the universe starts. But what you meant when you said that in the second turn of the wheel was nothing starts of its own accord. Nothing starts by definition. Then you said those things which stop. Forget the things which start. Then you said nothing which stops starts from its own side either. So you used that kind of wording during the second turn of the wheel.
swamani shiwa, swama shiwa, swamani siya. Shiya kola karshiya sana, rangi tsengi chubiya ko tawani ni mepa ida te, ngama rangi tsengi chubiya, tawani ni mepa chawa.
Then you use the words sumana shiwa means peace from the beginning of all beginnings, peace for all time. Sumana shiwa means peace for all time. But when you said that, what you meant was no object in the universe has any existence from its own side or of its own accord. And you use that kind of language too. Then the fifth quality that you mentioned in the second turning of the wheel, right? We finished 4. The fifth quality that you mentioned in the second turning of the wheel was that everything is gone beyond grief. Remember, this is the Tibetan word for nirvana, really. But here it has a special meaning, says Geshe-la. Grief here means its own true existence. And when you say everything has gone beyond that, you're meaning that no object in the universe is such that it hasn't gone beyond its own true existence, meaning that nothing has any true existence. Nothing exists from its own side. So now, during the second turning of the wheel, you used 5 different descriptions, 5 different qualities, which all basically refer to the same thing. Listen. I want to ask you a question. I want you to give me an answer. So you think about it. We don't need to look at the book or anything like that. I want you to consider the following question. In the first turning of the wheel, this enlightened being says nothing has any natural or true existence of its own. Then in the second turning of the wheel, the same enlightened being, same guy, says nothing has any natural existence. Nothing, it's impossible for anything to have any natural existence of its own. So what do you think? Do we have a problem here or not? You know, we have an enlightened being who's saying 2 completely opposite things. What do you think is going on here? Different problem here, not that the duje sambe wangi sumbare is mato. First, I ask you the following question: is there a contradiction in the wording or not? Forget the meaning. Is there a contradiction in the wording? That siksinla chena de gawales. Why is it contradictory in the wording? What makes it contradictory in the wording? Dini ki shitun yomane siga. Gawa gimbe tare dini ki shitun yomane. He'd like you to repeat the words that you think are contradictory. Could you tell me what he said in the first? Give me any example of what he said in the first turning of the wheel that contradicts any specific example from the second turning of the wheel. He says, give me this. You said, oh, in the wording it's contradictory. Hey, give me some wording from the first one that's contradictory to some kind of wording from the second one.
So, rangi thinking chupa. So, kan, they say everything. Kan,
Chutamje.
rangi thinking.
So the 2 contradictory phrases, and then now I'm just saying. Gawa se 16 ki gawa kari sena. Damadila su so rangi thinking dupa yes. Then 16 the coloniba get 16 the dilla kari get do sena. Chutamje rangi thinking dupa res and 16 di ni gawa res.
Dire
Wait, again, shoot. Somebody take the dog out. Somebody just pick him up and take him out. And then close the door, he says, you guys are getting... He says, we all got different mind streams, and he's going out.
What did it?
That's 16 and go did it.
Time is a gun to Tini, ya can share. Sanjay Jumden, the country share, Tini, a gun to what? Time is a sense of the nine of IT. Rangi Tini took to say Suya Kodan, Rangi Tini Mark says same Dama, Topa Chisho, the same Dama, Topa, Simna boy, Rangi Tini took Suya tell Topa Chair, you said, and Tini Church of the Rangi Tini Mark said Suya tell Topa Chair, you said, same Dama, Rangi Tini Mark Suya tell Topa Chair, can't that Church of the Rangi Tini Mark, Senator, more music. A mind-only school person, it's very suspicious, they think, to say, oh, everything from physical matter on up doesn't have any existence of its own accord. They start thinking, uh-oh, you guys are nihilists. You guys are denying the existence of everything. So when they are confronted with this contradiction of the Buddha saying, first, everything does have some natural existence or some existence of its own accord, and then he says, secondly, oh, nothing has any natural existence or existence of its own accord. And when they're confronted with this apparent contradiction, they start to doubt the second turning of the wheel. They start to say, I kind of don't like that one, because that one sounds like saying that none of these objects has any existence at all. Then of course Yanda Pat, being like a mind-only school, this Bodhisattva is sort of tending towards a mind-only school. So the one he's going after is the second turning of the wheel. He's like pressing the Buddha on, his question is pressing the Buddha on the second one. He's saying, now what? Beginning, and then you said they are naturally nirvana or gone beyond the state of self-existence, right? You said those five. And this is the thing that I have the problem with. This is what I have a question about, is what you said during the second turn of the wheel, when you spoke of five characteristics, which basically all boil down to saying that nothing has any existence from its own side. That's what my problem is with, Lord Buddha. That's what I want you to explain to me. We're on to page 6, line 2, for those of you who are following. Okay. And then the next thing this Bodhisattva says, the next thing the Bodhisattva says to Lord Buddha is, okay, you said you said during the second turn of the wheel that all existing objects have five characteristics, all of them boiling down to not existing from their own side. I have a doubt about it, I don't understand about it, and this is what I'm asking you to clear up, and this is what I'm asking you to give me an answer about. So he repeats it again, saying, before he said, this is what I have my doubts about, and now he's saying, this is what I want you to talk to me about, this is what I want you to give me an answer about. This is really beautiful. The question itself and the response is the content of the third turning of the wheel. You see? That's kind of cool. So
In the first turning of the wheel, he says nothing. He says everything has its own self-existence. The second turning of the wheel, he says nothing has a self-existence. As the third turning of the wheel, this bodhisattva shows up and starts asking questions about the first two turnings of the wheel, and that becomes the third turning of the wheel. Okay.
한 딜이 콜로 타마디나 찍도요. 이제 하장 걸로 동거를 심이 기찍텔라 신계계용 콜로 딜이 있는데 그냥 아주 슈고 두바들레 거 슈바 인데 얘는 뭐지다 좀 듬바이마다.
맞아.
이게 시송소 니니 도대 가직도 최선정 원님에 봐서 송받은. 또 콜로니 받네.
맞아.
가직도 통보는 수업이 랑기 생기는 수업아. 여봐 수수 송만이 라서 샤나. 라고 카랑 샤나 랑자 샤나. 아니 간두도 이나 산제 좀 된데 세디 오늘 전에 단이 정보 통신 공인지에서 갈라와시 돈이 너무 심한 차단하고 해서 나와 메거데 나와 메거데
맞아
같이라 보는 원이 매버서도 송시 티디스 까 도파치에 결혼 원이 매버서 들어가니 맞도 없어 결혼 송월에 지금 간디 쉬버래 지금 장군하고 동거가 지금 얘기라 근데 이게 뭐 다이는 사람 나타났다 맞아 네 장군하고
So now Jetsun Kappa, the incomparable Jetsun Kappa, is looking at this statement, which is becoming the third turn of the wheel, right? And he wants to rip it apart. He wants to make sure we understand what's going on here. So first he says, Yandapa, the Bodhisattva is asking about the second turn of the wheel, in which Lord Buddha said that nothing had any true existence. And then the Bodhisattva is comparing it to the first turn of the wheel, in which the Buddha said, everything does have its true existence. And then Jetsun Kappa says, what this Bodhisattva is trying to point out to the Buddha is that if we take your words literally, if we take it the way it seems to be in those two turnings of the wheel, it seems like you're contradicting yourself. And I just wanted to ask if you could clarify this for us, because I'm sure you had some reason, or you had something in mind for saying what you did, but could you kind of clarify it for us and explain what you're thinking, which in Tibetan is an important word called gongba. What was your gongba? What did you really have in mind when you seemed to be contradicting yourself back then?
무슨 마시는 된지 쉬이 그래. 지금 찍네. 그거 봐가는 순간에 간대지 라이트 먼저 순간에 간대지. 무슨 쉬이랑기. 전다 니가 더 빠지면 좋다. 랑 콜로 타는 걸라랑 생이 들어서 ken가 간다 보는 순간에 된지마도 그때 도가 충만이어서 그 된지 쉬이 찍기 깨지니 그렇죠.
The actual wording of the Bodhisattva's question is in the second turning of the wheel, you said nothing had any true or natural existence. Then what did you have in mind when you said that? Because that's where his main problem is. But by implication, says Jetsun Kappa in the next two lines, which is 7 from the bottom and 6 from the bottom, by implication then, he's also questioning the first turning of the wheel. So directly he only says, what did you have in mind when you said nothing had any true existence? Then by implication, he's also saying, well then what did you have in mind when you said that everything did have a true existence? But since his main problem being of a mind-only type, the main problem is with Lord Buddha's statement that nothing has any natural existence, that means no existence. He's mainly talking about that. But of course, he also must have some question in his mind about the content of what did the Buddha have in mind when he taught that in the first turning of the wheel, everything does have a true existence. For example, if there's a guy, this is an everyday example, okay? One guy is like making a big advertisement. He says, I'm leaving town. I'm getting my tickets ready. I got my baggage set. I got a 12 o'clock train going out. I got everything ready. And he's talking to you like that yesterday. And now today, he comes up to you and says, I'm not leaving. Okay, so which one are you going to question him on? Are you going to say, what did you mean when you say yesterday, I got my tickets ready, I'm on the 12 o'clock, I paid everything, my stuff is all packed up? Or are you going to say to him, well, why are you saying you're not going now? Okay, which one will you have more doubt about, or which one will you be more focused on? Which statement that he gave will you be asking about more? The second one. You'll be saying, well, how come you're saying now that you don't want to go, or that you're not going? You don't go and say, well, how come you said yesterday you were going to go? You know, you don't say that. You don't question the first statement. You question the second one, and then by implication you're questioning, you know, what he said before also. Okay, but the main focus of your concern or your question or your doubt is the second statement. And it's exactly the same here. There is concern about the first statement, but that's not the point. By questioning the second statement big time, you're questioning the first statement by implication.
Hang it in the fish ever, fish ever, mother, yeah, colony, color tamen, oh, yeah, because of Ritigas stores at that drum, the colony,
I'm just using this as an example, and I don't want you to think that in the third turning of the wheel there was any debate about whether or not the guy said he was going to buy a ticket, whether or not the guy actually left town. That's not part of the third turning of the wheel. It's a problem if you take things literally, isn't it? You might start thinking that he really did say that during one of the turns of the wheel. You might also start wondering whether or not there were trains in the time of the Buddha. Just a joke. Now there has come up in the commentarial tradition, there has come up a misunderstanding about what Lord Buddha meant when he talked about existing by definition or not existing by definition. And in this next section, Jetson Kappa is addressing this misunderstanding that came up during the commentarial tradition.
야나기 케바 로변 다 벽에도 좀 코랑시는 왠지기 로변 왠지기 다 야나랑 깨면로 왠지기 다 벽에도 좀 독살 쓰기 있어요.
라 독살
또 바당 셀레복이죠. 독살 쓰기 다 왠지기 야나 깨면다 벽에도 좀 독살 쓰기
나서
어디 다 홍기 다 케바도 전부 시비지. 홍기 어디 공제에 된다는 거 폴로 숨바지 알아. 어디 공제죠. 폴로 제바 좀 시작이 야나기 되지. 왠지기 제부 시비지. 다 나라 콜로 통비 나라 랑기 세디 천주인이 좀 알아 신이다 천자니 신이 꼴은 이 천자 진짜 뭐라고 좀 비싼 듣고 신이 꼴을 샤는 이 천이 랑기 세디 천이다 천자시 천이를 문진 제샤야 하게 듣는
There was a commentator that is called in Tibetan the Great Chinese, or the Great Chinese Commentary. And he says his name in Tibetan is Dzogtsel, Dzog meaning complete, Sel meaning clear. And he believes that the Chinese word, the corresponding word is called Wensik. And he was a great commentator. He did comment extensively on that sutra, which is the content of the third turning of the wheel, which is where the Buddha tried to explain what he meant in the sutras, right? Dode Gonsel, which is called the commentary by Lord Buddha on what he meant in the sutras. And when this commentator, the great Chinaman, he's called, when he got to this point about the word that kept coming up, existing by definition, he took it to mean literally definition in the sense of defining an object, like fire being hot and burning or something like that. He took it to mean of the concept of defining an object. He took it to mean the literal definition of a thing, existing through the words which define it or something like that. He took it that way.
군다 말아서 딱 군다 아니 내용 군다 세계에서 시험들 내용 그랬어. 상황 용도 군다 손세 그랬어. 다 군다 세야 콜라 다 가르면서는 랑이 주버데 메 샤르고 때문에서 다 천이다 천장이 수시 천이 거는 문제잖아. 다 군다라 천이 요 말에 세계적인 팀들이 양고하를 그렇게 내봐 인다. 이 천이 문제들이 빅도
in general, later on there will come the three great attributes or the three great qualities that are like the central theme of the mind-only school. One of them is called kuntak, which means to exist in name only or to be nominal. And the idea is of something being nominal is that it doesn't have any true existence of its own. Da kundaki seni mela se kunda seadi seni maduba sedagamia seni dan sunjagi seni da chebayena kyun chamuchigene. In general, the mind-only school says that the concept of things existing only nominally, or nominal, the concept of nominal, can be explained as not existing by definition. And he would have taken that to mean nominal means doesn't have a definition. See what I mean? So there's a big difference between not existing by definition and not having a definition. So if you take it the way he took it, then Jetsun Kappa says you have a problem that when the mind-only school gets to explaining the idea of existing nominally or nominal things, then since they describe that as not existing by definition, then if you explain the word definition with the same connotation that you want to explain it with, then you'd be saying that the mind-only school says that there are certain objects in the world that have no definition, so it can't mean that. Okay.
가르스나 시험되나 군다도 천이메 시드랑 신 주바 매보고 시행고 시행시는 그 천이도 선생님이시는 군다도 천이메 신 샹나 한요가 차송 하나 디종아.
There'll be this kind of hassle later on, says Jetsun Kappa, that if you explain the word existing by definition as having no definition, then when you get to the mind-only school's own explanation of things that exist nominally, and they say they don't exist by definition, you're going to have to be saying that, oh, that stuff doesn't have any definition at all. Got it?
마세베치니 군다호랑 문딩 집에 카두나 군다라랑 생이 주바메 신베 찍거라 세하고요. 그래서 너 타메나. 그러나 마토버치니 군다라 천중이 집 생이 메센산 찍고 써봐.
In the third turning of the wheel, they start to talk a lot about things existing nominally and not existing by definition. And if they're getting into the problem there that not existing by definition means not having a definition, then in the mind-only school's own presentation during the third turning of the wheel, you're going to have this problem that they're describing something as having no definition at all. So your interpretation of what Lord Buddha means when he says things don't exist by definition cannot be correct when you explain it as meaning they don't have any definition.
다 인도다 디네마 첸도다 다 얘기 때바텔라 톡바치 식갈에 각사 콜로 담배나 송사이 디네 야베이드 망도 송자스라 디나는 도포 식갈에 각사다 때도 가서 고각사 거를 정글라만 송가고 심시네다 니가도 찍디두가 디 고주디리 니가도 찍다기 될 찍디도 디 고주레 디 송가르스 다 단다지도 되나 슈고 듬바데레시 슈고 듬바데시 슈고 얘네만 찍딩이 바데레 나서 감나도 바다 도말라 대반남지 셴도 셰장 오늘 주 도단 잘나 좀 접기에 또 두고 잘고 됐다. 어디 잘고 그랬어. 정글라만 통하고 지금 하나 또 세야고 손에.
So now we're on to page 7. He's on the second line. Our savior, Jetsun Kappa, is now going to go through the sutra and identify a few of the more difficult words for you and explain the few of the more obscure words in this whole big sutra passage we just had. So Jetsun Kappa wants to make sure you understand what they refer to. So when the sutra refers to various categories, that's the one that refers to the 18 categories. And when it says many categories, that's the one, remember we confuse them ourselves, when you'll get to the 6 categories. So when he says various categories, he's talking about 18 categories. When he talks about many categories, he's talking about the 6 categories. And he says people have explained it differently, but they're wrong. This is what they refer to.
이 가르도서 되게 디자인 뒤지 봐. 콜 가면 크리시비 디자인 뒤버 죽바고라. 죽바고라 가면 되라. 제주 시잘샤로. 제주 콜라 칸나서 봐다. 도마 저러면 돼요. 다칸 좁게다 죽심스요.
When we were describing among the 7 groups, I believe it was the 4th one. You can check, but it was group number 4, and they started talking about the categories, and there were 4. 6th one, he says. The 6th of the groups, and they talked about the dhatus, and in the sutra there they say, oh, the dhatus have 4 qualities, and he talked about the various dhatus, the various categories, and then he talked about the numerous categories. So when Lord Buddha says various, he's talking about the 18 categories. When he says numerous, he's talking about the 6 categories. And so this is one clarification that Jetsun Kappa is making for you, so you appreciate the words of the sutra. Then Jetsun Kappa is trying to help you out with a remember we said there was an anachronism, an ancient word called mikyupa, and he's trying to help you out with that word. Remember that this word came in the explanation of the 7th category, the 7th part of the 7th category, right? I'm sorry. Yeah. No, it was the 7th of all the groups was the 37 qualities of enlightenment and 37 components of enlightenment. Inside of there were 7 groups if you take them by groups, and 37 if you take them individually. But the 8th quality of all of them, I think it was the 8th quality, of all 37 or all 7 groups of the 37, whether you take it that way, is that you wouldn't be separated from, right? Or something like that. It was like is the 6th one? What was the 7th one? Oh, no, it's the 5th one maybe.
Perpetuation.
No, there was widening was the last one. Perpetuation was the 7th one. We must be on the 6th one. Yeah. Dupa did it. Mikyupa said dupa. Dumpa said it. Dupa did it. Rangi said dupa. Oh, you're right. Number 6. And Jetsun Kappa here is explaining that very rare word, extremely rare word. He's saying the Tibetan here means not to be separated from or not to be divided from something, inseparable. Okay? So Jetsun Kappa is trying to clarify that rare word for you. Jetsun Kappa's modus operandi is to go for the hard spots and soften them up for us. We have completed the first section, which is where the Bodhisattva asked the question to Lord Buddha. Now we're on to the next section. So we've reached line 5, page 7. And this is the 2nd category, which, as you remember, is where Lord Buddha makes his response. This is when you get Lord Buddha's answer. Now Jetsun Kappa, in his explanation, is going to start using the word or the expression Ngonyi Mepa. And Geshe-la wants you to understand that when he gets to the word Ngonyi Mepa, which means doesn't have any nature of its own, Tsongkhapa is mainly referring to the expression Rangitseniki Madupa or Rangitseniki Meba, which means doesn't exist by definition. So he wants you to know that from here on, when Tsongkhapa starts talking about things have no nature of their own, he's actually referring to the expression found in the sutra, which says things don't exist by definition. Okay, so he wants you to understand that from here on out, when he says they don't have their own nature, he's talking about they don't exist by definition in the way that phrase was used in the original sutra during the question and during the 3 turnings of the wheel. Okay. When Lord Buddha gives his response to the Bodhisattva, since the Bodhisattva expressed concern about the content of the second turning of the wheel mainly, right? The guy didn't go on the train or something like that, then Lord Buddha is going to address his response mainly to that part of the question that was expressing doubt about the content of the second turning of the wheel, where Lord Buddha said nothing exists by definition.
태만이 쓰여버렸어. 가르스는 공부 투삼 시에서디 랑이 태니 마투가 매 세팅이 삼모딘데 질렀다는 소리 진 투삼 시에서 삼모땅서 직당 타티 상마잖아 시어와 오 시부티 송하게 매매스 매송바티 삼모딘데 질렀다는 송바이 진에 이게 그하기 우아송바고 직 프랑 미세신 기상동서 디 현다 시저를 시비 상동서 딘디지 알아서
When Lord Buddha gives his answer to the concerns expressed by the Bodhisattva about the second turning of the wheel, remember there were 5 qualities in the second turning of the wheel that the Bodhisattva was asking about. The first one being, oh, you said that nothing existed by definition, or nothing's nature was possible. Nuoni machipa means nothing. The nature of everything is impossible. And then he went on to 4 other characterizations, right? So the Buddha in his reply, Lord Buddha in his reply, is going to treat them, the five parts, as 1 and then 4. So first he's going to talk about how come I said the nature of everything is impossible, and then how come I said those other 4 things about all existing objects. So we'll have 2 sections now. So there'll be 2 sections coming up here. First it'll be Lord Buddha responding on why was it I said nothing had any nature, that the nature of things was impossible. And then why was it that I said those other 4 things, starting with things don't start, things don't stop, ... Okay, so the answer is going to be in 2 parts. So if out of the 5 we chop off the last 4, and we're not going to talk about them right now, we're going to talk about the first of the 5, which is where Buddha said the nature of everything is impossible. They cannot have a nature like they seem to have, right? Which means they don't exist by definition. When Lord Buddha responds to that, and he explains himself, he says, look, Yandapa, what I was meaning, what I meant to say was this. When he responds, his response can be treated in 3 different categories. First one, we're right in the middle of page 7. Dortemba means Lord Buddha gives a brief response, or a sort of an inclusive response. And then secondly, we go on to a more detailed explanation of that response. And then thirdly, Lord Buddha, in trying to explain himself, after having done so briefly and in more detail, says, look, if you still don't get it, I'll give you an example. I'll give you some kind of concrete example, so maybe you can understand what I'm trying to talk about. Okay? Then the answer begins with the words Dinayana part, which means that's that bodhisattva's personal name. So the point here, says Geshe-la, is that Lord Buddha is trying to tell him, check this out, listen carefully. Okay, I'm telling you your answer now. So first he says, he addresses him by name, so so he's alerting the bodhisattva. Now listen, it's time for you to listen carefully, okay? Because he's addressing him by his own name. Okay. Oh, Dunayana part.
Yeah, chönam ji ngoni me pa ni na ba sum ki dar ke. Sum yu che. Ten ngoni me pa chi che. Kyo ngoni me pa ni che. Na ba ngoni me pa. O ti sum bo ka na on sam no tan ne. Solo pa ba le chö tam je rang ti ko me sin ni ti che to.
And Lord Buddha responds in the following way. Oh, Dunayana part. Here's what I meant when I said that nothing had any nature of its own, or that nothing existed by definition. What I meant was that three different things. First, I meant that things don't have any nature of their own. They don't exist by definition. Secondly, I meant that, let's say it this way. They don't have any nature of having their own qualities. They don't have any nature of starting, and they don't have any nature of being ultimate. And those are the three things that I was talking about when I said things don't have any nature. They don't have any nature of having any characteristics. They don't have any nature of starting, and they don't have any nature of being ultimate. And those are the three things I had in mind when I said things don't have any nature.
What is? Tati para de la munjing che go ngarang to de de pe che ko me ba ngarang to munjing che go de ali xiang yong de kun da sum se de de ko to de be.
Tiyo mane ngemandi.
네, 나 다시 알리 코로나 지금 알아도 문딩 시에자 바다가 알아도 좀 잠나서.
He says we're going to insert here a little bit of our own explanation, okay? Because we got to go. If we don't take a little bit out of the concepts or the teachings of the Mind-Only school now, if we don't take sort of a break right here and explain the three qualities that are proposed, that are expounded by the Mind-Only school, you're going to have trouble later on. So what I'm about to say is like an aside, which I would like to insert here, and we'll just kind of insert this sort of aside so that you guys know what Lord Buddha is talking about in terms of the beliefs of the Mind-Only school. The first of the three attributes, we'll call them attributes, okay, or the three attributes of existing objects that the Mind-Only school talks about is called Shenwang. Shenwang means depends on others or under others' control, and we can call it dependence, okay, or something like that. It's not the dependence of interdependent religion, or okay, it's a different meaning, but it means the dependence that things have. That refers to the objects of our everyday world. I don't have to go into a big deal about it, okay? This is all what we call Shenwang. This is all what we call under the control of other things, meaning dependent on other things. So when we talk about the first attribute, which is expounded by the Mind-Only school, we're talking about all the objects in your normal experience are called dependent, okay?
What is this? 다 용도 세도 당하고 미기 통해다 암적 해야 돼. 다 매원도 다 같이 갈라하고 그랬어. 이내 다 문제 무치도 다 변나 죽다 고마 엄마 제서 사무 동반이 동이 생기셔. 뭐 동이 그 민들 용도 다셔. 당하도 돼. 근데 길레지 감 샤주 다 싫어라.
The second attribute that the Mind-Only school talks about ain't so easy to see. Not something you can see, not something you can taste or feel. If you go up into the higher schools, into the middle way schools, Madhyamika schools, they start talking about things like emptiness. The word they use is emptiness. And that is what the second of the attributes refers to. Yongdruk means something like total existence or something like that. But in the Mind-Only school, the word total existence is an expression to describe what is in the higher schools called emptiness. So it's not something you can see, it taste, feel. It's not something in your everyday world. It's something that's a little harder to perceive. But that's the idea that they have in mind when they talk about the second attribute. The first attribute being dependence, the second attribute being total existence or something like that. Meaning, in this case, something like emptiness.
다 군다시에디요. 군다시에디 다 나라도 두지 직시에 온데서 야 미기 통해라 매바 딱 봐서 딱 비리지를 다 용도 거의 유다면 나는 뒤도 용 코파 비주를 딱배나
나사
테마인게 딱 비리지 시에디요 알아서 배나 딱 비리 생각으로 똑배 나와서 빈간다 저랑도 가슴 좀 거래 올 수다 소보다 좋아지는 직치면 다도 삼보다 안에서 가슴 딘데지 삼삼이나 똑배나 지금 용도 와 다고 뭐하고 그래서는
많이
대 똑바로 두는 시기 직차 유연이 단단한 사람도 유연 진짜 이렇게서 딱 맞지 직시하는 거라서 어다 딱비리 강이 맞대로 동이 파 비주
많이
비리 파면 딱비리 강이 맞대로 군다는 주죠
hang on a sec. Something I always wondered about, so it's good to hear an explanation. The third attribute, or the third bunch of objects that the middle mind-only school is talking about, is called nominal stuff, nominal things, okay, which is called kuntak in Tibetan. Nominal things, again, is not something in your everyday experience. It's not something around you that you can touch or feel, or that's just very familiar to you. Again, it's something you have to think about. He says a simple way to explain what the mind-only school means when they talk about nominal stuff is that they are talking about unchanging objects. All the unchanging objects in the world. Now you should think, wait a minute, Geshe-la, number 2 was, you said was pretty much equivalent to emptiness, but that's an unchanging object. He says, you're right, kick out number 2, and all the other unchanging things in the world are general description of what we mean in the mind-only school when we talk about the third attribute, which is nominal stuff, things that are just labeled things. So if you take out from all the unchanging things in the universe, emptiness, then the rest of the unchanging things you have, things which do exist but which do not change, those would all be in the third category of the third attribute, which is talked about by the mind-only school. He says an example, if you want, of an unchanging thing. You know, I was hoping, it's interesting because he pulled out a new one for me. He said the mental image you have when you're talking about something that you haven't seen before. So he says, if you talk about, you guys have just been to Mongolia, you're on your way to Russia, and when you talk about one of those countries to me, I've never been there, but I get some kind of picture in my mind. And that picture is in kind of a pure, perfect, unchanging picture of something, which is just an imagination of something. And although imagined things don't exist, the imagination of the thing does exist, and the imagination of the thing is such that it doesn't really change. You know, I just have this perfect mental image of what you mean when you say Mongolia or Russia or something like that. And that's an example of something in the third category of the mind-only school when they talk about things that are just nominal, things which exist nominally. He says, when I talk about Russia or Mongolia this way, I'm not denying the existence of Russia, okay? I'm just saying I haven't experienced it directly. So when I think of Russia and I close my eyes and you say Russia and I try to conjure up some image of Russia, I'm conjuring up a dunji, right? I'm conjuring up a mental image, a perfect little mental image of this thing that you call Russia, and I'm getting this thing, and if we were to sit down and try to decide, is that mental image I have of Russia a changing thing or an unchanging thing, since it's this made up imagination, perfect picture I have of something, it's not really changing in a sense. That thing we call labeled or kundak, or belonging to the third category of the mind-only school, which means things which are just nominal stuff. And that's what I mean. I'm not denying existence of the little towns around India and stuff like that either. The reason I'm bringing up this idea of a perfect little mental image, of closing your eyes and trying to get a perfect image of Russia or something and that being unchanging, the reason I've inserted that here is that it's going to be very useful for you in 2 or 3 days from now when we hit that concept and we start talking about that concept. So I thought I'd just throw it in here. We're talking about concepts now, mental ideas, mental pictures. And in a sense, the question of whether it exists or not is really hinges on the question of whether you've thought of it or not. You see what I mean? So it's when you close your eyes and you start thinking about Russia that the mental image of Russia starts to exist. You see what I mean? So its occurrence in this world, it's being born in this, or I shouldn't say that, but anyway, its existence in this world is dependent upon your closing your eyes and thinking of it. So the thing doesn't, the one quality of a mental concept or an imagined thing is that your thinking of it is what makes it happen. You said the concept or the image, the mental image starts to happen when you start to think about it. Now I'll give you another example. Let's say you're sitting in a class, your legs are starting to hurt, you're starting to think about, I think 2 hours must have gone by now, I don't know what Geshe-la is going on for, and then you suddenly get this mental image of your mind of your feet walking down those steps right there. And that mental image didn't exist until you start to think about it, you see? And then when you start, your legs start to hurt, and your butt starts to hurt, and you start thinking about walking down those steps, and you can actually in your mind see your feet hitting each step. Until that moment, that mental image didn't exist. So it's your thinking about it which has brought the mental image into existence right at that moment. So really, these are very slippery things. Whether or not they even exist depends on whether or not it has occurred to you. Maybe some of you are having a mental image of a cup of tea in a certain cup that you know on a certain table over there in Gyeonghang. But right now there's no tea, is there? All of those things are just created by your own imagination, really, right? The current cup of tea is a fantasy. It's a creation of your imagination. And all that kind of stuff you can throw into the third group of stuff that the Mind-Only school is talking about when they say nominal thing, nominal stuff. Take all those things that exist only because you just thought of them, and you can throw all those into category number 3. So now we're reaching to go back to where we start. We took off on a little tangent, right? Now we're coming back to the text. So everything from about 7 or 8 lines up from the bottom of page 7 down to the third line up from the bottom of page 7 has been the Buddha's short answer. Remember, first he's going to give a short answer. So Buddha has just given, Lord Buddha has just given a short answer to the question of Yandapakta Bodhisattva, and then Jetsun Kappa, in commenting upon the short question, says, what essentially Lord Buddha is saying is that when I said that things have no nature, O Bodhisattva, what I meant was things don't have any one of the 3 natures. And that's his short answer.
그런 송지 타는가 니 깨져도 시에버티 다가랑 담바 임버티 니 깨도 찍고 찍장지 파바 통이 송이가 요래 근데 뭐 라파톤에 대로 도알래 장스 파바 좀 된대기 찔러보네 최 삼제 원이 맞지바 시 송시에나 이지 뒤주나 매바 둘이 관계 대단히 원이 매바니 남바 숨라 보네 숨데 신이 원이 매바 숨부터라 보네 숨바 파바 통이 숨도 당가 정글로 통거 내 시에가 다가라 이제 가르쳐는 파바 통이 숨도 밑에 딱딱 지도 와서 공개
Jetsokapa is explaining in a single phrase what the Buddha meant in his shorter answer. And remember that Jetsokapa has explained the response with the one sentence, and he said what the Buddha meant when he said nothing had a nature was nothing has any one of the three natures, and he left you with that. And he wants to prove that when he says, when that's his characterization of the short response of Lord Buddha, now Jetsokapa, being Jetsokapa, has to say, and I have an authoritative source for saying that. So where does he go to? Does he go to some lama in Tibet or one of the more recent lineage lamas? No. He goes straight back to the founder of the MindOnly school, you know, the guy who really restored it in this universe, which is Master Asanga. So he goes straight back to Master Asanga. He goes to a book called Dua, and he's going to take his proof right from there, from Master Asanga's book, that his characterization of Lord Buddha's answers is a pretty good one, because in Asanga's own text he says, what did the Buddha have in mind when he said that nothing had any nature? I'll tell you what he had in mind. He meant that nothing has any one of three different kinds of natures that he was thinking of, and those are all spoken according to the level of the student. The student's mind was at a certain level, so I had to describe the lack of things, the lack of nature of things, in terms of the lack of three different natures. And that's why I got into three different natures, because there are three different kinds of disciples have different capacities, and because of the different capacities of disciples, when I was explaining the word no nature, I explained it to them in terms of none of three different natures. Quote, end quote, Master Sangha.
다 그런 게 지금 제가 좀 되게 이지라고는 최담정 원님에서 송시나 두와디로 리파토라 가르선 니 콜로 파발 최담정이 팀 맞고 송바데 가르라 보는 송바레 파바 통면을 깨져지 뒤중나 매바 아주 두바선 같아 파바 통면이 다 저라냐 네 랍기 매바 둘이 관계 대단 뒤에서는 두자 프랑 두자 심지어 삼삼으로 담이다 이거죠 그 둘이에 탑시라 아니 뭐님에 봐 숨라 보내 송데 진짜 가기 숨부터라 보내 송바레
So here he's Geshe-la and Jetsokapa, he's going to give a kind of a more detailed explanation of what Asanga meant when he explained that point. And here in Asanga's answer, it's also in the form of a question and an answer. So Asanga is saying, suppose someone came up to me, Asanga, Master Asanga, and said, what did the Buddha mean when he said nothing had any nature? Okay, no object in the world had any nature. Well, I'll tell you what he said. Mepa means, I'll tell you what he said, and now you listen to what I'm about to say. Okay, and that's his first part of his answer. Due wangi deraki ngoni mepa ni means due to the disciple's own mind, and Geshe-la says, remember that disciple means, in Tibetan, Dulwa means that which is to be disciplined. Meaning, disciple means the disciplinee. All right, in Tibetan it's a pun. He says, remember the disciplinee, according to disciplinee, the discipliner has to explain it. I am trying to explain it to them in terms of three different kinds of lack of nature. Okay, when I say no nature, I'm referring to three different kinds of a lack of nature, and those three different kinds of a lack of nature I have to use because of differing levels of my disciples.
他当初天面面看到空气些句是，他的是呢，怕罗本印尼就这么些，罗本印尼就这么些，别些松酒的些，拿来，那他的几个即将去的，先要的，先过了松酒的人就常来的，松酒把来家是应当松不得了，我你们nam松酒，我你们nam松啦。我呢，全能他们现在我你们点吧，意思是我你们把送不掉了，我呢，上节准备的就过了跑完了，全他们人听嘛都送了，这个即将的。
And then Jetsokapa says, I not only have a Sangha to quote, I have Vasubandhu to quote. You know, I can quote Master Vasubandhu too, because he says exactly the same thing in his 30 verses. He says, what did the Buddha mean in the second turning of the wheel, when he said nothing has any nature of its own, he was referring to the lack of 3 different kinds of nature, and that's what the Buddha had in mind when he said during the second turning of the wheel that nothing has any nature of its own. So I'm not just quoting Master Sangha, I can also quote Master Vasubandhu. The next bunch of lines is starting from the 6th line down, where he says Ganda Shechin La Sope. Jetsun Kappa is addressing a sort of an objection that somebody might raise. Jetsun Kappa has just got through saying this. Master Sangha said that, Master Vasubandhu said that, and now somebody came up to Jetsun Kappa and says, but that's not quite what they meant, Jetsun Kappa. You know, I'm not sure you have the right quotation here. I'm not sure that you're using the right quotation here. Di Jetsun Kappa ki lendire. He says one important point you have to keep in mind from here on out, and don't forget it, is that we are in the mind-only school. And he says, I think you guys might have had some teaching from Geshe-la about the Madhyamika school, middle way school. He says, one important thing to answer in the debate that's about to occur and in all these sections here, don't forget we're in Jetsun Kappa's explanation of the mind-only school's explanation of what's going on. And don't get confused and don't start mixing in Madhyamika explanations. So one thing to keep in mind throughout the following pages is that Jetsun Kappa is in the middle way school and he's answering everything according to the middle way school. And no, mind-only school, sorry. And we don't go mixing, American traditions and Indian traditions. When you're in America, you follow the American tradition. When you're in India, you follow the Indian tradition, and you don't mix them up. So don't forget we're following the mind-only school's tradition. Okay. I'd like to start tomorrow from this point. We're on page 8. We're on the 6th line, and it'll be Jetsun Kappa's response to an objection that he shouldn't really have used those quotations and that they're not really very relevant to this point, okay? If I start going more, you might get into a new nominal existent thing that didn't really, that wasn't existing before, like, okay? If I keep going, you'll have a few new nominal objects in mind. Okay. In the future, when people ask you about how was your trip to Saramay and India, you probably have a lot of trouble with all these extra kuntaks that you brought home, and you'll be thinking about all those extra nominal objects in your mind, and they'll all come back to you: the cup of tea, the foot on the step, and all those things. Your mind will just get filled up with all these new nominal objects that you created while you're over there in Sarah.
Oh yeah.
Samye Shindu Medewadi Dokunam Dakshina Japaso Idam Guru Radha Mandala Kamya Yatayami Adi Kyawaku Sanam Yashe Tozokshin Sanam Yashe Nachuri Tamba Kuni Toba Sho. Thank you.